Great. Well, Chris, I gave a little bit of an introduction, but I'd love for you to kind of tell everybody here who you are, what's your background, what's your story behind Manufacturing Happy Hour, give them a little context, and go from there.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So my name is Chris Luecke. I host a podcast called Manufacturing Happy Hour. And really what I do is I help manufacturers tell their story to their ideal audience. And I help folks dissect some of the buzzwords, a lot of the complex topics we discuss in industry in a more digestible way. The reality of Manufacturing Happy Hour is it got its name because I wanted to talk about manufacturing, automation, the same way you would chat with someone about it over a beer. You're more candid. You're more of a storyteller at that point. You're not trying to use all the exact language that the marketing department tells you to use all the time. You're just being honest. And, at the end of the day, as someone that's a podcaster, trying to create content that people can listen to in the car, when they're at the gym, when they're multitasking, right? So it's not necessarily a deep dive into all the bits and bytes. We get into a little bit of that, right? But the way I like to describe it, it's a leadership podcast disguised as a manufacturing podcast. And just to tell the story really quickly of how it got started, I was a salesperson in the automation industry for most of my career. And I had moved to San Francisco, California, where I needed a new way to reach a younger audience of decision makers. And I was in my 20s at the time, and I was just thinking, hey, how do I consume content? I watch videos on YouTube. I listen to podcasts. This was around late 2016. I'm like, why isn't there a show for the manufacturing industry at that time? So cracked beer, started meeting up with colleagues, customers, other folks in industry, and started talking about manufacturing the way we would over a beer, literally over a beer, recording it, and it evolved into a platform that's now my full-time job. I tour around the country doing a handful of podcast dates a year. Show comes out every week on Tuesdays, and I do a lot of events like this. So what I'm here to talk about today is really, some of the lessons that I've learned from Manufacturing Happy Hour from my guests on the show, kind of a greatest hits of the podcast, if you will, as we go through some of the hot topics in manufacturing today.
Love it. I'm excited. So you're kind of walking the floor. You've had about 24 hours-ish of IMTS now to start to process. What's caught your eye so far? What are some of the things that you're starting to see that, are giving you, getting you excited?
Yeah, so I have a fun way of answering this because, as I'm sure some of you experienced, your plans to hit the entire show floor in the first day, you might get through one call and then realize that, oh my gosh, I have a lot more to see. But something struck me this morning when I got here right when gates were opening. I was recording something really early in the morning, so I had to kind of beat the crowd to get here. And I was up on one of the upper walkways, and I was walking by, and it was showing the board that had a lot of the sponsors of the event there. And at the top, you got Google, you got Microsoft, and when I moved to San Francisco 2015, that's what I would have expected to see in San Francisco at a tech conference. But it's 2024, and we're here at a manufacturing conference in Chicago. And those are the same marquee companies that we were seeing everywhere, 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, more than whatever that time frame is, right? It's cool to see that some of the biggest names that we know in technology are taking an expressed interest in manufacturing right now because they know there's opportunities here. They know there's challenges that need to be solved here. They're looking at the challenges they've solved for years and said, we could apply that to a plant floor. So that's one of the things that struck me the most, just seeing how different the makeup of companies are. I mean, for goodness sake, the whole East Hall is software for manufacturing. This show started as the International Machine Tool Show, and they had to change the name over the years because it's so much more than that. Manufacturing is so much more than that right now.
That's a really great observation, and I think it's something that we, we're obviously a software company here at the show, and we wanted to be right in the middle of all the hardware and where all the action was in the South Hall this year. But it's definitely a shift. There's an industry that's moving towards software. It's moving towards automation. What are some of the things that you've heard or seen, whether at the show or where your greatest hits here, as far as like digital transformation efforts? What are some of the things that you're hearing that people are struggling with or struggling to understand or finding success with?
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of answer this question in two parts, because digital transformation is a big word.
Yeah.
And I think my default when I hear stories about digital transformation, and oftentimes when I think about it, I think of large enterprises. I've heard stories on manufacturing happy hour about companies that had been growing over the years. They bought a manufacturing facility here, this country, and that country. They just gotten so big. This is going back to like 90s, early 2000s, that they're like, gosh, we need a way to start tying these plants together. We need to build a new facility and tie that in with our operation. And I'm going back to examples from like the early 2000s very intentionally, because we use the word digital transformation a lot like it's a new thing, and there are new technologies, there are new capabilities that have certainly changed what digital transformation can do. But there's still a lot of fundamentals that go into creating a successful transformation that I feel like I've heard from stories that occurred over 15 years ago, before digital transformation was a term, before it was cool, whatever it was. Companies had to go into it with an overarching objective. I was just given an example of, hey, we've grown, we acquired this company, we now have manufacturing plants in different parts of the world. What do we need to do to start tying those together? And why are we tying those together? Sure, maybe the plant managers and the different departments communicate with one another, but there's no disciplined way of doing it. We don't have a real easy way of looking at what quality at our plant in Sao Paulo versus our plant in Wichita is doing. You needed technology to accomplish that. So what I started to see from companies that have been doing this a while is they went into it with a really concrete goal. In the example I've been giving, it's growth. They need to tie these manufacturing plants together, because if they do, we can take a better look at quality. We can take a better look at where we're running into supply chain issues. We can make decisions that will fundamentally transform the P&L of our company. So I shared this story because what the best companies have done, and this is a pretty obvious point, but I'm going to share it anyway, they go in with a very specific measurable goal to their digital transformations. But when you go behind the hood, the things that I think are so timeless are how they went about doing that with their people. If you've ever been, I sold software and automation for a long time, right? If you've ever done that on a large scale, at some point, you're going to be talking to folks out on the plant floor, and then they're going to be like, well, I need to run this by the IT department. And if you're really trying to create a successful transformation, what I've seen some of the most successful companies do is they build a team with the right stakeholders from the get-go. So that way, you don't run into that finger pointing halfway through the project or repeatedly throughout the project. When you put together a task force to implement an MES, a CMMS on a large scale, for example, It's important to have that transformation team, if you will, with those stakeholders. So the reason I share this story, particularly at an enterprise level, have that goal, have a measurable goal, and also make sure you're bringing the right people into the fold. Because when I've listened to stories on what companies have done to succeed in digital transformation, those have been the common threads. The other thing I'm going to share is this is digital transformation on a large scale. And in addition to working in the automation space, I was focused on CMMS in my career, like working with the maintenance team. And I like to describe it as digital transformation light. If you're implementing a CMMS system, as an example, transformation, you think of a large company, you think of an enterprise-wide initiative. Maybe you're the maintenance manager at a particular plant, at your company. Maybe that's not the scope of your job right now to lead that entire transformation. But what I think is important is for people to think of their own careers, their own roles, where they are right now. Maybe you're the maintenance manager today, but you want to become a plant manager at some point, or you're a maintenance manager that works for a company. Maybe the culture is not totally there yet to do a full transformation, but at the very least, you can start transforming your department by taking little steps like that. So I like to think of that on a large scale and a small scale. Digital transformation oftentimes feel like really applies to large enterprises, but there are micro transformations, digital transformation light, as I like to call it, that can be really relevant to a small plate, a small company, or a single department.
I love that, and that really helps drive home this idea of like having ownership and being able to have take control of what you have control over, right? If you can't get the enterprise-wide deployment now, you can still change what your microcosm of your environment. And I know people sometimes do that, with shadow IT, come under the radar and do that, and sometimes they get a little bit of a wrist slap. But at the end of the day, the results help drive change internally, and that's something that's pretty exciting. And I think as we think about like where this industry is going, and whether that's manufacturing and the technology side of it especially, what are you seeing on the AI side and machine learning side that's starting to catch your attention right now?
I mean, some of the basics I see are some of the things that you do. For example, like the simple, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of artificial intelligence, for better or for worse, it's not ChatGPT. It's really, hey, I'm a software engineer. I need to get some code developed. Let me use the base code that's there to get me through the nitty gritty so I can actually start working on the things that are really applicable to this application. And in manufacturing, let's use CMMS example in the same way. If you can take like a manual and upload it to get your work order mostly created, I think that's a real fundamental example of a way to get into artificial intelligence in the manufacturing industry. That's one of the things that catches my eye. What I'm really interested in seeing how this evolves, where let's say from a maintenance standpoint, you created some failure modes to say, hey, if X, Y, Z happens, do this. Well, X, Y, Z isn't always going to happen in the same way. What if you can start using artificial intelligence to look at different points of causation? So it doesn't necessarily have to be you banking on the same failure mode happening all the time. That's how I see that really playing out more on the factory floor versus just the, hey, here's how we're creating a new procedure, SOP, etc. So those are a couple of my initial perspectives on AI.
Love that. And as we start to move towards this AI innovation and so a lot of the efficiencies that's going to bring, it's inevitably going to take a cut out of a lot of folks' day, right? A lot of people are going to have new time to, they're going to free up their time on things that used to be really labor intensive and administrative intensive. What are some of the skills that you think you would advise manufacturers and people in the industry to start focusing on to be sort of ahead of that trend? Relative.
Yeah, good question. I'm going to answer this. We'll stick on the AI track for a second, and then I'm going to kind of shift over to what I would call some timeless advice that I actually learned from a completely different segment of the manufacturing industry recently. So the first thing I would do is I'm doing this right now, just getting better at being like an AI prompter, how to ask the right things to get worthwhile answers that are in the scope of what you're looking to do. This is not manufacturing related, but part of manufacturing happy hours, throwing events. So I'm constantly in ChatGPT trying to figure out, what do I need to budget for this? And how many people do you think would come? What does a sponsorship look like for that? There are lots of ways you can just ask questions around your job and try to scope out what you need to do to create something brand new.
Start practicing that prompting, start figuring out what does this do, and what can I get out of ChatGPT or some of these tools, right?
Exactly. So practicing prompting, because I do think the same way a social media manager didn't exist as a job 15 years ago, you're going to start seeing, you're already seeing like AI prompt engineers. I don't know if that's the exact way it is, but that role has already been created in certain spots. I think the advice I would give, what do you need to succeed in the manufacturing industry, in the future of the manufacturing industry? Very recently, I was chatting with a number of shop floor leaders, people that operate CNC equipment, CNC Swiss operators. I had 3 different frontline leaders on the show, because right now, a lot of the conversations I have with manufacturers are, hey, we want our frontline to be empowered. We want the frontline leaders making decisions. And my thought was like, okay, I know I talked to a lot of executives on the show, but I want to talk to people that are out there actually operating the equipment on the front lines and hear what they have to say in order to succeed in the manufacturing space. And this isn't specific to AI or technology in general, but all 3 of the individuals I talked to in some way, shape, or form said, in your manufacturing career, you need to be an aggressive self-advocate. And not meaning you're trying to steamroll someone, but if you want to learn something, you got to go do it. If you want to execute on a project, if you see something, maybe based on the data that you're seeing out on the factory floor, you need to speak up and say, hey, I think there's an opportunity for me to make some improvements here. And what I would add to that is a lot of times, I don't know if it's a lot of times, but you're going to get the plant manager saying, okay, go for it. Or the shop manager's going to be like, all right, you can do it. You got to take the reins at that point. You can't just assume they're going to give you all the tools that you need to go get that done. So step 2 of being a self-advocate is not only vocalizing the areas where you see opportunities for improvement, whether that's leveraging tribal knowledge you had, or whether that's from some data that you leverage from some new technology. You need to be the one to execute on it, because I do think that's where a lot of people get held up, where they kind of get their permission and they start kind of waiting for someone to give them a leg up. Hey, that doesn't mean you don't ask for help, right? But you've got to be the one owning it and moving it forward at that point. So kind of some classic skills that, based on what I'm hearing from the front lines of industry right now, I think that applies across the board in manufacturing.
Absolutely. And, data is the new oil, right? It's the, a lot of the manufacturers are struggling to figure out how do we handle these siloed processes, and how do we get these cross-functional teams to communicate and work closer together. And so there's obviously that, take ownership, drive some of these projects. What advice do you sort of have, and what are you seeing? What are your sort of expectations around how that data evolution is going to continue to evolve across the manufacturing industry going forward?
Great question. And I'm probably going to give a different answer than you might be expecting.
That's okay.
We're here this week at IMTS. The best, latest technology in the manufacturing industry is right over there. It's right behind us in the West Hall. But if you travel around, let's say, rural parts of the U.S., you're going to see a lot of manufacturing facilities that just aren't there. They're just starting to get their data, for example. But what I'm seeing help, particularly, and I gave the example of rural areas, right? There are plenty of facilities in urban areas that just haven't gone through any sort of transformation, implemented technologies yet. What I've noticed is there are a lot of plants, manufacturers, companies where the old guard is starting to move out, right? And there's now the opportunity for new people to rise to the occasion. And they're seeing a lot of gaps just in the way things are done on a regular basis. Safety is lacking, culture is lacking. One example I saw recently was, I actually got to attend their morning meetings, but a plant where they recently went through a change in leadership at their facility. New leaders across the board from across the country are now leading the teams. They've implemented a 3-tier meeting approach where, hey, you've got your level 1 meeting in the morning, in the first topic, safety, you're talking about performance, you're talking about proactive topics to make your facility better in that meeting, and you bring that to the next level. Let's say, because that meeting, you've got your quality, you've got your manufacturing team, production, they're all there. Then they bring that to their team, and they bring that to the team after that as well. So they have those tiered meetings where the different leaders get to lead their respective organizations and start transcending the culture across the different spots of the facility. And I bring that up because in order to accomplish, let's say, getting the data you need to have the right culture in place first. And I share this story kind of as a reminder where not every facility is ready for everything we're seeing out there on the plant, out there on the IMTS floor right now. Could they be ready for maybe that's in the digital transformation light, that micro transformation I was talking about? Yes, those are the spots where you get the right proactive leaders stepping up to the plate to make changes, and you can start moving from there. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to kind of say, there are a lot of companies out there right now where you can look at how you unsilo information. You can get, let's say you're a CAD company, get that info across the digital thread from design to engineering to production. You've got different groups that have IIoT platforms out there that are, gathering the data from disparate sources and putting it in the different spots. You're going to see that all week. What I wanted to talk about were the groups that you're not necessarily seeing here right now that are out there at their manufacturing facilities trying to establish cultures that help them succeed in the future.
I love that. It really is, those small steps, those digital transformation lights can be the catalyst to start to build that culture that you need. And I think that's really a great way to frame it is helping understand how do you overcome that change management layer of it. And that's oftentimes a bigger hurdle than the technology itself, right? So I know we're coming close to the end of the session here. I wanted to give the folks here in the audience, if anyone has any questions they want to share here for Chris or myself while you're here, give you guys the opportunity for that. I have another question too.
Let's do it.
Ready.
I'm ready for it.
Okay, good deal. So, as we're thinking about one of the things that I'm hearing a lot about is the labor shortage, skilled labor shortage. Particularly, we're having challenges with that. What are you seeing or hearing about from folks on that front? Is that something that's coming up in some of the conversations you're talking about with folks?
When is it not? That is. I'm actually on my podcast now because the labor shortage topic is so ubiquitous. I have to ask folks to say, hey, what's your unique perspective on the labor shortage challenge? Just so I don't hear the same thing over and over again. But I want to share maybe one of the most powerful things I've heard recently. It was actually from some of the rural areas I've been traveling through. I think when it comes to the workforce challenge, I think everyone in this room is probably aware of, yes, if you have a high-tech plant floor, if you have the right culture, that's going to allow you to attract young talent, the right talent. It's because it's not just young folks, right? Like every generation doesn't want to be breaking their back out in the manufacturing world. They want things that work, the same way they're easy and they work in their personal life. One of the things that gets missed all the time is having creative ways of communicating how your company is doing that. And I was speaking to someone at a manufacturing facility, out in the rural area, and one of the individuals, moonlights is the wrong word, but he's also a teacher at the local tech school. And he teaches a class on, I can't remember if it's thermodynamics or something along those lines, right? But he was talking about that. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool because you're in a small area. There are only there are some great employers here, right? So this kind of gives you like the pick of who you'd want to bring on board. I'm like, you can probably grab all the straight A students. And he was like, actually, yes, it's great to get straight A student, but it also gives me visibility on who's a great problem solver, who tries hard. And I'm just thinking, it's like, wow, so you work at this company, you also teach at a tech school. Yeah. So you're kind of recruiting some of the best people you can get.
Developing interviews
in advance. And this is just one example of someone that's getting creative with how they're finding the right talent. If you're a company that has the tech and has the culture, I think what it really comes down to is being active and creative with how you get that message out there. Appear on panels with your local boards, your local municipalities when you can. Go teach at a tech school if that opportunity is available to you. So that's probably one of the first things that comes to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Chris. I'm really excited that we had an opportunity to bring you out here today and get some time with you. Everyone give it a round of applause for Chris. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
That's awesome, man.